The air was thick with the oppressive humidity of the Guyanese jungle, the verdant foliage seeming to close in around the winding path that led to the compound. Amara's heart pounded as she followed the barely visible trail, the dense undergrowth scratching at her skin, and the sounds of the forest echoing all around her. After weeks of research and investigation, she had finally tracked down the location of the mysterious New Eden, a remote, self-proclaimed utopian community that had captured her attention. Something about this cult, led by the charismatic Reverend Nathaniel, had piqued her journalistic curiosity, and now she was determined to uncover its darkest secrets. As the path opened up to reveal the compound, Amara couldn't help but be struck by its serene, almost idyllic appearance. Clusters of simple wooden structures were nestled within the lush surroundings, their thatched roofs blending seamlessly with the canopy above. A sense of tranquility hung in the air, belying the unsettling rumors Amara had heard about the community. Steeling her nerves, Amara approached the main gate, where a pair of watchful guards stood vigilant. She took a deep breath and plastered on her most convincing smile, projecting an aura of curiosity and openness. "Greetings," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "I'm here to learn more about your community. My name is Amara, and I've heard so much about the wonders of New Eden." The guards exchanged a brief, unreadable glance before one of them stepped forward. "Welcome, sister," he said, his tone formal but not unkind. "Reverend Nathaniel will be pleased to receive a new seeker of truth. Please follow me." As Amara passed through the gates, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept up her spine. The warmth of the guards' welcome did little to dispel the underlying sense of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. The compound was a hive of activity, with people of all ages going about their daily routines. Amara observed them closely, looking for any signs of distress or coercion, but their expressions were placid, their movements fluid and purposeful. It was as if they had been expertly molded into a well-oiled machine, each cog perfectly in sync with the others. The guard led Amara to a modest yet well-maintained structure at the heart of the compound. "This is the Reverend's house," he explained. "He will see you shortly." Amara nodded, her pulse quickening. This was her chance to get a glimpse into the inner workings of the cult, to understand the true nature of Reverend Nathaniel and his followers. As she waited, she surveyed her surroundings, taking note of the subtle details that might provide clues to unravel the mystery before her. The door to the house opened, and a tall, imposing figure emerged. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she laid eyes on Reverend Nathaniel for the first time. His presence was commanding, his features striking and charismatic. There was an undeniable magnetism about him, a quality that immediately drew Amara's attention. "Welcome, my child," the Reverend said, his deep voice resonating with a sense of warmth and authority. "I am Reverend Nathaniel, and this is the blessed land of New Eden. What brings you to our humble abode?" Amara steeled herself, forcing a sincere smile. "Reverend, I've heard so much about the wonderful community you've built here. I'm intrigued by your teachings and the way of life you've created. I was hoping to learn more, if you'd be willing to share." The Reverend's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Amara thought she saw a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. But just as quickly his expression softened, and he smiled benevolently. "Of course, my child," he said, gesturing for her to follow. "Come, let me show you the wonders of New Eden and the peace that our Lord has blessed us with." As Amara trailed behind the Reverend, she couldn't shake the growing unease that settled in the pit of her stomach. There was something about this man, about the compound, that made her skin crawl. Whatever secrets lay hidden within this utopian facade, she was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. Deeper into the compound they went, Reverend Nathaniel's booming voice echoing through the tranquil surroundings as he extolled the virtues of their way of life. Amara listened intently, nodding along, all the while scrutinizing every detail, every subtle nuance in the Reverend's words and the reactions of the people they passed. It was clear that the followers of New Eden were utterly devoted to their leader, their eyes shining with reverence and their movements carried out with a sense of purpose and precision. Amara couldn't help but wonder what unseen forces compelled them to relinquish their former lives and surrender themselves to this community. As they approached a large, open-air pavilion, the Reverend paused, his gaze sweeping across the compound with a satisfied expression. "This is the heart of our community, my child," he said, his voice taking on a tone of deep reverence. "Here, we come together as one, to worship the divine and to find our true purpose in this world." Amara followed the Reverend's gaze, taking in the rows of worshippers seated in quiet contemplation. The scene was almost hypnotic, the soft chanting and the rhythmic sway of the bodies creating an atmosphere of profound serenity. But Amara couldn't escape the nagging feeling that beneath this veneer of tranquility, something far more sinister was brewing. As the Reverend continued his tour, Amara knew that she had only scratched the surface of the truth. The deeper she delved into the mysteries of New Eden, the more she feared the darkness that lurked within. Amara's heart raced as she followed the Reverend Nathaniel deeper into the heart of the New Eden compound. The tranquil atmosphere that had initially greeted her now felt stifling, the ever-watchful eyes of the cult's followers weighing heavily upon her. As they approached a cluster of modest, well-maintained structures, the Reverend slowed his pace, gesturing grandly around them. "Here, my child, is where our community gathers to share in the bounty of the land and the blessings of our Lord," he said, his voice rich with reverence. Amara nodded, mustering a polite smile as she took in the scene. Groups of men and women tended to various tasks: gardening, food preparation, even what appeared to be simple carpentry. There was an undeniable sense of purpose in their movements, a synchronized rhythm that spoke of a well-oiled machine. "Your followers seem dedicated to their work," Amara observed, keeping her tone neutral. "There is a clear sense of community here." The Reverend beamed, his eyes shining with pride. "Indeed, my child. Here, we have found our true calling, our purpose in this world. Through our devotion to the divine, we have been blessed with a life of peace, harmony, and fulfillment." As they continued their tour, Amara couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the followers' demeanor whenever the Reverend drew near. Their movements became more fluid, their expressions more serene, as if they were in the presence of a revered and benevolent deity. The journalist in Amara itched to delve deeper, to uncover the cracks in this seemingly idyllic facade. But for now she knew she had to tread carefully, lest she arouse any suspicion. Their next stop was the communal dining hall, where a group of followers were gathered, sharing a simple yet nourishing-looking meal. Amara's stomach growled, a reminder of how long it had been since she'd eaten. "Please join us," the Reverend said warmly, gesturing to an empty seat at one of the long wooden tables. "Our table is open to all who seek the path of enlightenment." Amara hesitated for a moment, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Reverend. I would be honored." As she settled into the seat, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the other followers. Their expressions were not hostile, but there was an underlying wariness, as if they were sizing her up, trying to determine her true intentions. Evelyn, a young woman with a serene, almost ethereal countenance, met Amara's gaze and offered a small, tentative smile. Amara returned the gesture, sensing a glimmer of connection, a shared uncertainty about this place. The meal passed in relative silence, save for the occasional murmur of conversation. Amara ate slowly, her senses heightened as she observed the rituals and behaviors of the cult members. She noted the reverence with which they spoke of the Reverend, the way they deferred to his authority with unwavering devotion. Once the meal was finished, the Reverend rose from his seat, commanding the attention of the room with a simple gesture. "My children," he began, his voice resonating with a mesmerizing cadence, "let us now gather for our afternoon meditation, to cleanse our minds and open our hearts to the divine." The followers rose as one, their movements fluid and synchronized, and began to file out of the dining hall. Amara hesitated, unsure if she was expected to join them, but the Reverend turned to her with a warm smile. "Come, my child," he said, extending his hand. "It is time to commune with the Lord." Swallowing her trepidation, Amara followed the Reverend and the others to a spacious pavilion, where they took their seats in a large circle. Amara found herself nestled between Evelyn and an elderly man, his face etched with a serene, almost beatific expression. As the Reverend began to guide the meditation, Amara found herself drawn into the rhythmic chanting and the steady, hypnotic sway of the followers. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and a sense of calm seemed to settle over the entire compound. But within the serenity, Amara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. She watched the Reverend closely, observing the way he effortlessly commanded the attention and devotion of his flock. His words were soothing, lulling the followers into a state of deep contemplation, but Amara couldn't help but detect an underlying current of manipulation. Glancing at Evelyn, she noticed the young woman's brows were furrowed, her expression troubled. Amara wondered if the same doubts and unease that were slowly creeping into her own mind were also taking root in Evelyn's. As the meditation drew to a close, the Reverend rose and gestured for the followers to stand. "My children," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "our time of reflection has strengthened our bond with the divine. Now let us turn our attention to the task at hand, that we may continue to prepare for the great awakening that is to come." The followers erupted into a chorus of enthusiastic cheers, their faces alight with a fervent devotion that sent a shiver down Amara's spine. She watched as they filed out of the pavilion, their movements seemingly more purposeful, more deliberate than before. As Amara made to follow the crowd, Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes darting nervously. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I couldn't help but notice your unease. Are you truly one of us?" Amara hesitated, considering her options. She could deny Evelyn's suspicions, or she could take a chance and confide in the young woman. Ultimately, the journalist in her won out, and she leaned in, keeping her voice low. "No, Evelyn, I'm not one of you," she admitted. "I'm a journalist, and I've come to uncover the truth about this place. I'm worried about what I've seen and heard, and I need your help to understand what's really going on here." Evelyn's eyes widened, a flash of fear and uncertainty crossing her features. But then, to Amara's surprise, a glimmer of resolve appeared in her gaze. "I'll help you," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, "but you must be careful. The Reverend, he has eyes and ears everywhere. If he discovers your true purpose, we may both be in grave danger." Amara felt a surge of relief and gratitude, but before she could respond, Evelyn had slipped away, disappearing into the crowd. Alone, Amara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the perilous path that lay ahead. With Evelyn's unexpected assistance, she might just have a chance to uncover the truth about New Eden and the Reverend's sinister agenda. The rhythmic chanting echoed through the pavilion, its hypnotic cadence seeming to reverberate within Amara's very bones. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, her eyes half closed, surrounded by the devotees of New Eden as they swayed in unison, their expressions serene and their movements fluid. At the center of the gathering stood Reverend Nathaniel, his powerful voice rising and falling in a mesmerizing prayer. Amara watched him intently, her journalist's instinct to observe and analyze heightened to their sharpest point. There was an undeniable magnetism to the Reverend's presence, a charisma that seemed to envelop the entire space. His words flowed with a practiced ease, weaving a tapestry of biblical references and promises of spiritual enlightenment that captivated his audience. Amara could feel the tension building within her, a growing unease that threatened to shatter the tranquil facade that had enveloped the compound. She glanced sideways at Evelyn, who sat beside her, her eyes closed in reverent contemplation. The young woman's brow was furrowed, and Amara wondered if the same doubts and discomfort were beginning to take hold of her as well. As the chanting reached a crescendo, Reverend Nathaniel raised his hands, commanding the attention of his followers. "My children," he proclaimed, his voice resonating with a resonant authority, "today we are gathered to commune with the divine, to open our hearts and minds to the true path of enlightenment." The devotees responded with a chorus of enthusiastic murmurs, their faces alight with a fervent devotion. Amara watched as the Reverend paced before them, his gaze sweeping across the assembly with an almost possessive intensity. "For too long we have been shackled by the constraints of the material world, the shallow pursuits of the flesh," the Reverend continued, his voice carrying a note of righteous indignation. "But now we stand on the precipice of a great awakening, a moment of transcendence that will liberate us from the bondage of our earthly existence." Amara leaned forward, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she scrutinized every nuance of the Reverend's words and gestures. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a slight hardening of his features that belied the benevolent facade he had presented during their earlier interaction. "The path to this ascension, my children, is not an easy one," the Reverend intoned, his brow furrowed with a pained expression. "It demands sacrifice, a willingness to let go of the worldly attachments that have kept us tethered to the darkness. But if we walk this path together with unwavering faith and devotion, we will be reborn into a new era of enlightenment, where the divine will guide our every step." Amara felt a chill run down her spine as the Reverend's words echoed through the pavilion. The devotees, their faces rapt with attention, began to murmur in agreement, their voices swelling into a chorus of affirmation. Evelyn, who had been sitting quietly beside Amara, suddenly opened her eyes, a hint of panic visible in her expression. Amara caught her gaze, silently conveying her own growing unease. The young woman's lips parted as if to speak, but before she could utter a word, the Reverend's voice boomed out once more. "And so, my children, I implore you to open your hearts and minds to the truth that lies before us," the Reverend declared, his arms outstretched in a gesture of supplication. "The path to salvation may not be an easy one, but I promise you the rewards that await us on the other side will be beyond our wildest dreams." The devotees erupted into a thunderous applause, their faces alight with a fervor that Amara found deeply unsettling. As the Reverend basked in the adoration of his flock, Amara couldn't help but wonder what twisted vision he had in store for them, what sacrifices he demanded in the name of this elusive enlightenment. Once the applause had subsided, the Reverend raised his hand, silencing the crowd with a gesture. "Now let us prepare ourselves for the next phase of our journey," he announced, his voice tinged with a sense of finality. "Tonight we will gather again to commune with the divine and to take the first steps towards our ascension." The devotees erupted into a chorus of excited murmurs, their faces alight with a sense of anticipation. Amara felt a knot of dread forming in the pit of her stomach, her mind racing with a flurry of unanswered questions. As the crowd began to disperse, Amara turned to Evelyn, who remained seated, her expression a mix of apprehension and resignation. "Evelyn," Amara whispered, leaning in close, "what is he planning? What is this ascension he speaks of?" The young woman's eyes darted nervously, her gaze flitting around the pavilion as if afraid of being overheard. I'm not sure," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the Reverend, he's been talking more and more about it in recent weeks, about the need for us to make a great sacrifice to achieve enlightenment." Amara's heart raced, a sinking feeling of dread settling in the pit of her stomach. "Sacrifice?" she echoed, her voice laced with a growing sense of horror. "Evelyn, what exactly does he mean by that?" Evelyn shook her head, her eyes brimming with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. "I don't know, Amara," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm afraid that whatever he has planned, it's going to be something truly terrible." The two women sat in a tense silence, the weight of Evelyn's words hanging heavily between them. Amara's mind raced, her journalist's instincts urging her to dig deeper, to uncover the truth behind the Reverend's ominous rhetoric. But as she glanced around the pavilion, taking in the fervent devotion of the cult's followers, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. These people, so fully immersed in the Reverend's teachings, seemed willing to surrender themselves to his will, no matter the cost. Amara knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, that exposing the Reverend's true intentions could put her own life, as well as Evelyn's, at risk. But the journalist in her refused to be silenced, her determination to uncover the truth burning brighter with every passing moment. As the last of the devotees filed out of the pavilion, Amara turned to Evelyn, her expression resolute. "I'm going to find out what he's planning," she whispered, her voice laced with a steely determination. "And I'll do whatever it takes to stop him, even if it means risking everything." Evelyn's eyes widened, a flicker of fear and admiration crossing her features. "Amara, please be careful," she pleaded. "The Reverend, he has eyes and ears everywhere. If he discovers your true purpose here, I fear for what he might do." Amara nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. "I know, Evelyn," she replied, "but I can't just sit by and let this happen, not when lives are at stake. I have to try." With a deep breath, Amara rose to her feet, her gaze fixed on the doorway where the Reverend had disappeared. Whatever dark secrets lay hidden within the walls of New Eden, she was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The shadows of the compound seemed to lengthen as Amara made her way back to the modest structure where Reverend Nathaniel resided. Her mind was reeling with the implications of the sermon she had just witnessed, the Reverend's ominous words about ascension and sacrifice sending a chill down her spine. Evelyn had confirmed Amara's worst fears. The Reverend was planning something truly sinister, something that threatened the lives of his devoted followers. But what was the nature of this great sacrifice he spoke of, and how could she possibly stop him before it was too late? Amara's grip tightened on the notebook in her hand, the pages filled with scribbled observations and half-formed theories. She had to find a way to expose the truth, to get the story out before the Reverend's plans came to fruition. But the weight of the task at hand weighed heavily upon her, the sense of isolation and vulnerability within the confines of the compound, making her feel more alone than ever. As she approached the Reverend's house, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. Amara's heart leaped in her chest as she recognized the imposing form of Marcus, the Reverend's second-in-command, and the one she had heard whispers of as the cult's enforcer. "Well, well, if it isn't our new visitor," Marcus said, his deep voice laced with a barely concealed menace. "The Reverend has been expecting you." Amara swallowed hard but refused to let her fear show. "I was simply taking a walk, enjoying the serenity of your community," she replied, doing her best to keep her tone even and confident. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his piercing gaze seeming to bore into her very soul. "I think we both know that's not the real reason you're here, is it, Miss Amara?" he said, his lips curling into a sardonic smile. Amara felt her stomach tighten with dread, but she steeled her nerves and met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying," she said, her voice betraying only the slightest hint of uncertainty. "Don't play coy with me," Marcus growled, taking a step closer. "I've seen the way you've been snooping around asking too many questions. You're not fooling anyone, least of all the Reverend." Amara's heart raced as she realized that her cover had been blown. She had been so careful, so diligent in her attempts to blend in, but somehow the cult's enforcers had seen through her facade. "I'm merely a curious outsider seeking to understand the wonders of your community," she insisted, her voice edged with a sudden desperation. "There's no need for—" "Enough," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp and unyielding. "The Reverend has been very clear. The secrets of New Eden are not to be shared with the outside world, and anyone who tries to uncover them will be dealt with accordingly." Amara felt the blood drain from her face as the implication of his words sank in. She knew then that she was in grave danger, that the cult would stop at nothing to protect their twisted secrets. "I don't mean any harm," she pleaded, the facade of confidence crumbling. "I simply want to understand." "Understand?" Marcus sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have the faintest idea what you're up against, girl. The Reverend's vision is far greater than your petty curiosity." Amara opened her mouth to respond, but the sudden sound of a door opening behind her made her freeze in her tracks. Slowly she turned to see Reverend Nathaniel himself standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Ah, Miss Amara," the Reverend said, his voice deceptively calm. "I see you've been acquainting yourself with our dear Marcus. I do hope he's been making you feel welcome." Amara swallowed hard, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a response. "Reverend, I was just taking a walk, as I said. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." The Reverend's gaze narrowed, and for a moment Amara saw a glimmer of something dark and unforgiving in his eyes. "Trouble, my child," he said, his voice dripping with a false sense of concern. "Why, the only trouble here is the one you've brought with you, by daring to pry into the affairs of our sacred community." Amara felt a chill run down her spine, and she couldn't help but glance nervously at Marcus, whose imposing presence seemed to loom ever larger. "Reverend, I assure you I mean no harm," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I'm simply a curious outsider, seeking to understand the beauty and wonder of your teachings." The Reverend's lips curled into a thin smile, and he shook his head slowly. "My child, your curiosity has only served to uncover the cracks in the foundation of our blessed community," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of disappointment. "And we cannot have that now, can we? Amara's heart raced as she realized the full implications of his words. She was treading on dangerous ground, and the cult's leaders were clearly not willing to tolerate her prying. "Reverend, please, she began, but the Reverend raised a hand, silencing her. "Marcus, my dear enforcer," the Reverend said, his gaze never leaving Amara's face. "I believe it's time we remind our guest of the importance of keeping our secrets safe." Amara felt a surge of panic as Marcus stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow over her. She knew she had to act quickly to find a way to escape before the enforcer could lay a hand on her. "Reverend, I assure you I will leave your community and never speak a word of what I've seen here," she pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. "Please just let me go." The Reverend's expression hardened, and for a moment, Amara saw a glimmer of pure malice in his eyes. "My child, you have already seen far too much," he said, his voice low and ominous, "and the price for such transgressions is steep." Amara's heart raced as she realized the futility of her pleas. The Reverend and his enforcer were not going to let her go, not when she had uncovered the dark secrets at the heart of New Eden. In a desperate bid for survival, Amara turned and fled, her feet pounding against the hard-packed earth as she raced through the compound. But she knew it was only a matter of time before Marcus caught up to her, and the thought of what he might do filled her with a bone-chilling terror. As she ran, Amara caught a glimpse of Evelyn, the young woman's eyes widening with a mix of fear and concern. Amara desperately wanted to call out to her, to beg for her help, but she knew that doing so would only endanger the woman's life as well. With her heart pounding in her ears, Amara pushed on, her lungs burning with the effort. She had to find a way to escape, to get the story out before the Reverend and his enforcer silenced her for good. The fate of the cult's followers hung in the balance, and Amara was determined to do whatever it took to save them, even if it meant risking her own life. As the compound's perimeter came into view, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. If she could just make it to the treacherous jungle path, she might have a chance of slipping away undetected. But just as she reached the gate, a powerful hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back with brutal force. "Nice try, little bird," Marcus growled, his grip tightening like a vice. "But you're not getting away that easily." Amara's heart sank as she realized the full extent of her predicament. Trapped within the confines of the cult's compound, with the Reverend and his enforcer closing in, she knew that her time was running out. The only question that remained was whether she would manage to escape with her life, or if she would become yet another victim of the Reverend's twisted vision. Amara's heart raced as she stared into the unyielding gaze of Marcus, the Reverend's ruthless enforcer. Trapped within the confines of the New Eden compound, she knew her time was running out. The Reverend's ominous words had made it clear that he would not tolerate her prying into the cult's darkest secrets. With a surge of adrenaline, Amara wrenched her arm free from Marcus's iron grip, her eyes darting around the compound as she searched for an escape route. The enforcer's brow furrowed, his expression darkening with a menacing fury. "You're not going anywhere, girl," he growled, his massive frame blocking the path to the gate. "The Reverend wants you to pay for your transgressions." Amara's mind raced, desperately seeking a way out of the dire predicament she had found herself in. She couldn't simply give up, not when the lives of the cult's followers hung in the balance. Somewhere deep within the compound, the Reverend was hatching a sinister plan, and she had to find a way to uncover the truth before it was too late. "Please," Amara pleaded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't want to cause any more trouble. Just let me go, and I promise I'll never speak a word of what I've seen here." Marcus's lip curled into a sneer, his grip tightening once more. "Your promises mean nothing to us, girl," he spat. "The Reverend has given the order, and I intend to carry it out." Amara's heart sank as she realized the futility of her pleas. Marcus was unmovable, his loyalty to the Reverend unwavering. She had to find another way to escape, to get the story out before the cult could silence her for good. Glancing around the compound, Amara's gaze landed on a familiar face. Evelyn, the young woman whose doubts and unease had mirrored her own. Their eyes met, and Amara saw a flicker of resolve spark in Evelyn's expression. Without warning, Evelyn darted forward, her movements surprisingly nimble and decisive. Amara watched in astonishment as the young woman confronted Marcus, her voice trembling but her stance unwavering. "Please, you must let her go," Evelyn pleaded, her eyes locked with the enforcers. "Amara's not a threat to us. She's just a curious outsider, nothing more." Marcus's brow furrowed, his grip on Amara's arm momentarily loosening as he considered Evelyn's words. "The Reverend's orders are clear, girl," he growled. "This one has seen too much, and she must be silenced." Evelyn shook her head, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "But surely there must be another way," she insisted. "Surely the Reverend would understand that she means no harm, that she simply wants to understand our teachings." Amara watched the exchange with bated breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Evelyn was risking everything to protect her, and Amara knew that she couldn't let the young woman's sacrifice be in vain. Gathering her courage, Amara stepped forward, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "She's right, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't want to cause any trouble. If you just let me go, I promise I'll leave and never speak a word of what I've seen here." Marcus's gaze narrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line as he considered their pleas. For a moment, Amara dared to hope that he might relent, that he would see the wisdom in letting her go. But then a sudden movement from behind caught her attention, and her blood ran cold as she saw the Reverend himself approaching, his expression dark and unreadable. "What is the meaning of this?" the Reverend demanded, his voice booming across the compound. "I thought I made myself clear, Marcus. The girl is a threat, and she must be dealt with accordingly." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Reverend, please, I beg you to reconsider," she pleaded. "Amara means no harm. She's simply a curious outsider who wants to understand our teachings. Surely there must be a way to resolve this without resorting to violence." The Reverend's gaze burned into Evelyn, and for a moment, Amara saw a flash of something akin to disappointment in his eyes. "My child," he said, his voice dripping with a false sense of compassion, "I understand your desire to show mercy, but the path we have chosen requires sacrifice. This girl has seen too much, and she must be silenced." Amara's heart sank as the full implications of the Reverend's words settled in. She realized then that he had no intention of letting her go, that he would stop at nothing to protect the dark secrets of New Eden. Summoning every ounce of her courage, Amara squared her shoulders and stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she met the Reverend's steely stare. "Reverend, I've heard your sermon, and I've seen the devotion of your followers," she said, her voice laced with a newfound determination. "But I can't just stand by and let you lead them down a path of destruction. What are you planning, Reverend? What is this ascension you keep speaking of?" The Reverend's expression darkened, and Amara saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "My child," he said, his voice dripping with a menacing calm, "you have no idea the true nature of the path we have chosen. The ascension you speak of is the ultimate sacrifice, the only way to achieve true enlightenment and usher in a new era of divine glory." Amara felt a chill run down her spine as the Reverend's words sank in. "Sacrifice?" she echoed, her voice trembling with a growing sense of horror. "You can't be serious. You're planning some kind of mass suicide, aren't you?" The Reverend's lips curled into a twisted smile, and Amara knew that her worst fears had been realized. "My child," he said, his voice dripping with a deranged conviction, "the path to salvation is not an easy one, but it is the only way. Our followers have accepted this truth, and they are prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure the success of our divine mission." Amara's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as she grappled with the devastating revelation. She had to get this story out, to expose the Reverend's twisted plans before it was too late. But trapped within the compound, with the Reverend and his enforcers closing in, she knew that her chances of escaping were dwindling by the moment. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught her eye, and she turned to see Evelyn, her expression a mix of fear and determination. The young woman met Amara's gaze, and in that instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Without warning, Evelyn lunged forward, grabbing Amara's hand and pulling her towards the compound's inner sanctum. "This way," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. "I know a way we can escape, but we have to hurry." Amara felt a surge of hope and gratitude, and she followed Evelyn without hesitation, the sound of the Reverend's booming voice echoing behind them. As they raced through the compound, Amara knew that she was running against the clock, that the lives of the cult's followers hung in the balance. But with Evelyn by her side, she felt a newfound resolve, a determination to uncover the truth and put an end to the Reverend's sinister plans, no matter the cost. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she followed Evelyn through the winding paths of the New Eden compound. The young woman moved with a sense of purpose, her eyes darting back and forth as she navigated the maze of structures. "Hurry, we don't have much time," Evelyn whispered urgently, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. "The Reverend and his enforcer will be coming for us." Amara nodded, her mind racing as she tried to process the devastating revelations she had just uncovered. The Reverend's plans for a mass suicide ritual in the name of Ascension sent a chill down her spine. She knew she had to get this story out to warn the authorities and the world before it was too late. As they rounded a corner, Evelyn led Amara to a small, nondescript structure. "This is the communications hub," she explained, her fingers trembling as she worked the lock. "If we can get a message out, maybe we can stop the Reverend's plans before they're carried out." Amara's eyes widened with a renewed sense of hope. "Evelyn, you're a lifesaver," she breathed, her voice thick with gratitude. "Let's do this." The pair slipped inside the dimly lit room, Evelyn quickly powering up the ancient radio equipment. Amara hovered anxiously, her ears straining for any sign of approaching footsteps or the Reverend's booming voice. Evelyn's fingers danced across the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Okay, I'm setting up a secure channel," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Now we just need to get through to the outside world." Amara held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears as Evelyn began transmitting a coded message. She knew that every passing second increased the risk of the Reverend and his enforcers discovering their location, but she also knew that this was their only chance to stop the impending tragedy. Suddenly the radio crackled to life and a voice emerged, tinged with static but unmistakably clear. "This is the Guyana Police Department. We copy your transmission. What is your emergency?" Evelyn's eyes widened and she quickly leaned in to respond. "This is Evelyn from the New Eden compound in Guyana. We have an urgent situation. The Reverend is planning a mass suicide ritual for his followers. You need to send help immediately." Amara hovered behind Evelyn, her hands trembling as she waited for the police's response. She strained her ears, listening for any sign of approaching danger, but the sound of the jungle seemed to have swallowed up the rest of the compound. After a tense moment, the radio crackled to life once more. "Copy that, Evelyn. We're mobilizing a team to your location immediately. Can you provide any additional details on the Reverend's plans?" Evelyn glanced at Amara, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "The Reverend has been talking about an Ascension ritual for weeks now," she explained hurriedly. "He's convinced his followers that they need to make a great sacrifice to achieve enlightenment. I'm afraid he means to lead them all in a mass suicide." Amara felt a shiver run down her spine as Evelyn's words sank in. The gravity of the situation they were facing was almost too much to bear. Countless lives were at stake, and they had to act quickly if they were to have any chance of stopping the Reverend's twisted plans. "Understood," the voice on the radio responded, its tone laced with a sense of urgency. "We're on our way, Evelyn. Keep the line open and stay hidden. Help is coming." Evelyn nodded, her eyes brimming with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please hurry." As she ended the transmission, Amara placed a reassuring hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with a sense of profound gratitude. "We might just have a chance to stop this madness." Evelyn turned to Amara, her expression etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "But the Reverend, he'll know we're trying to expose his plans," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He won't stop until he's silenced us for good." Amara nodded, her own sense of dread threatening to overwhelm her. "I know," she said, her gaze hardening with a newfound resolve. "That's why we can't let our guard down. We have to find a way to get out of here, to get as far away from the compound as possible, before the Reverend and his enforcer catch up to us." The two women quickly made their way out of the communications hub, their steps quickening as they navigated the winding paths back towards the compound's perimeter. Amara's mind raced, her journalist's instincts urging her to gather as much evidence as possible to corroborate the Reverend's sinister plans. As they neared the gate, a sudden movement in the shadows caught Amara's attention, and she froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Evelyn tensed beside her, her eyes wide with fear. Well, well, a deep, menacing voice rumbled. Look what we have here. Amara's breath caught in her throat as Marcus, the Reverend's enforcer, stepped out of the darkness, his massive frame blocking their path to freedom. Behind him, the Reverend himself emerged, his expression twisted with a malevolent anger. "My children," the Reverend said, his voice dripping with a false sense of concern, "I'm so disappointed in you. After all I've done to bring you into the light, you would betray me like this?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling but her gaze unwavering. "Reverend, please, you have to stop this," she pleaded. "The lives of your followers are at stake. You can't go through with this Ascension ritual. It's madness." The Reverend's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Amara saw a flash of something akin to regret in his expression. "My child," he said, his voice laced with a hint of sorrow, "you simply don't understand the magnitude of what we're about to achieve. This is the only way to ensure our salvation, to cleanse ourselves of the shackles of the material world." Amara stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she locked eyes with the Reverend. "You're wrong, Reverend," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "This isn't salvation, it's mass murder, and I won't let you do this, not while I'm still breathing." The Reverend's expression hardened, and he gestured to Marcus, his voice dripping with a chilling finality. "Then you leave me no choice, my child. You and your friend must be silenced, for the good of the commune." Amara felt Evelyn's hand grip her arm, and she glanced over to see the young woman's face etched with a mix of terror and determination. "Amara, we have to run," Evelyn whispered urgently. "There's no way we can take them on." Amara nodded, her mind racing as she searched for a way out of their predicament. She knew that the Reverend and his enforcer would stop at nothing to silence them, and the lives of the cult's followers hung in the balance. As Marcus advanced, Amara and Evelyn turned and fled, their feet pounding against the hard-packed earth as they raced towards the compound's perimeter. Amara could hear the Reverend's booming voice echoing behind them, his words laced with a twisted sense of conviction. "You can't escape, my children," the Reverend cried. "The path to enlightenment is upon us, and nothing will stand in our way." Amara and Evelyn ducked and weaved through the maze of structures, their lungs burning with the effort. Amara could feel Marcus's presence closing in, the enforcer's massive frame crashing through the undergrowth like a raging bull. As they neared the gate, Amara caught a glimpse of the treacherous jungle path leading away from the compound. "Evelyn, this way," she shouted, her voice barely above a ragged gasp. The two women sprinted towards the path, their hearts pounding in their chests. Amara could hear the thunderous footsteps of their pursuers drawing closer, the sound of the Reverend's voice urging them on. Just as they reached the gate, a powerful hand grabbed Amara's arm, yanking her back with brutal force. She cried out in pain, her gaze locking with Marcus's, the enforcer's eyes burning with a savage intensity. "Nice try, little bird," he growled, his grip tightening like a vice. "But you're not getting away that easily." Amara struggled against his iron grip, her desperation fueling her strength. She could see Evelyn hesitating, torn between her desire to flee and her unwillingness to abandon Amara to the Reverend's enforcers. "Go, Evelyn," Amara shouted, her voice strained with the effort. "Get out of here, get the police." Evelyn's eyes widened, and for a moment Amara saw a flicker of anguish in her expression. But then, with a resolute nod, the young woman turned and disappeared into the treacherous jungle path, racing against time to bring the authorities to their aid. Amara watched her go, a surge of relief and dread washing over her in equal measure. She knew that Evelyn's escape was their only hope of stopping the Reverend's plans, but she also knew that she was now at the mercy of the cult's ruthless enforcer. As Marcus dragged her back towards the compound, Amara steeled her nerves, her journalist's instincts urging her to gather as much evidence as possible, even in the face of her own peril. She had to find a way to stop the Reverend, to save the lives of his deluded followers, no matter the cost. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and the ever-present threat of the Reverend's twisted vision. But Amara was determined to see this through, to uncover the truth and expose the cult's darkest secrets, even if it meant risking everything she had.